nhớ rằng trong bao nhiêu số lần số thứ đã nói của nhà hóa này cả cứ vả tới kia sĩ hạt đến sẽ đại diện chỉ sẽ kiến nó có nhớ rằng nhưng nó của nhà trả lời nhận tôn trao rồi nó ra đa năng lương thường bán đấy cho nên đã họ sẽ đại là công kể là rèn đã cụ tiếp liền. The archery field was empty as the wind picked up and blew across the hay-covered land. There, in the middle of the field, stood a lone archer wearing all black. He pulled back and fired as it landed a perfect bullseye. He fired again, and this time the tip split the arrow in half. Lowering the bow, Mongsu smiled, proud of his success. Finally, he was able to master this technique. His eyes were gentle as he walked to set the bow down by the barrel. He pushed up his sleeves and gathered up his cloak to go when he saw Kyochia coming down the hill. What was this woman doing here? The mere sight of her made him want to jump off a cliff. Thank the heavens his father didn't like her enough to make her his bride. But he felt sorry for his brother, for his father had hinted marriage. But still, he would help his brother in every way to make sure it didn't happen. Mongsu! Takucha! She cried as she ran faster to reach him. Kumalun dakata! Rolling his eyes and clearly not hiding his annoyance, he blurted out, Morachi! Gachimahalu olakya! She reached out to hold his arm. Tacha! Kumalu jinking haina! He released himself from her hold and crossed his arms. Hai lo. Kaya yung pong idea, si hua tay sai ku la ua chi sa tu ta ra. Nhà con ga chi idea, con nói yung bảo chi tao. Tay có chi hà ku tâm mình. Yêu chi sa chi nghe con ku ba chi tao. Sao là chi tâm mình. Gyon tao ít biết tao con dễ hồng đó. He walked forward and she blocked his path. Ku khay ka pong idea ta shi no, chi sa cho tôi tu pa khay lan đó nữ bư sọ sa. Yêu có chi ba ku kia rồi nó có tu cứ tôi tu pa khay u pa nè. Có pa sai ka tay kia luôn nè cái tí nó. Mongsu looked toward where the manor was, and this was news to him. When did Jisa return? And who had he brought back with him? This perked up his attention, and he watched as Kyochia's face paled. This newcomer must have done a number on her because she looked ready to cry. The halls were quiet as Mongsu made his way to his brother's chamber. He opened the door and found his brother sitting on a chair drinking tea half naked. This was a scene he'd never seen before. He looked on the bed, and sure enough, a body was there with dark hair that tumbled across the pillow, but her face was hidden, and Mongsu walked in as his brother put on a robe. He asked as he closed the door. Laughing, Mongsu replied, He watched as annoyance filled his brother's eyes. Yeah, his exact same thoughts. A soft moan came from the bed, and the woman turned round, the covers falling away from her face, and Mongsu saw the beauty that lay there, the most gentle lips that begged to be kissed, and the softest cheeks that needed hands to touch was on the bed of his younger brothers. But he noticed that her shoulders were bandaged. Yo, Yaronu. Jisa turned to glance at her for a moment, and then returned his gaze to his brother. Yo chetsake kishielama. Yo kupon za ye inchi zhongli na. Kupo li la se. Zhongli na ku te nu yin gong chito ilu nang okay. Mongsu took a seat as his brother sat across from him. Ni lang te. Ni kutu. Laughing, Mongsu replied, Ku bao ma te ya ka tu ma. Ku ichi kilia mi ku. Jisa leaned back in his chair and answered, Sai tao idea. Ni tu ku yor shi lan tia ka chang san de ku ne sa ke to. Mong Su sat up. Ka oli ka chi ya la ba. Ni chu mo nang tia ni lo. Chi mo. Ni ne chia ye tu mo ni mo le mo kai. Yong yi da ku shi ni. Thao ku pa ka chang la ku ma cha ni mu yin shi li. Mong Su smiled and then he eyed the sleeping woman on his bed. A thought occurred in his mind. Ya thao ka shi ta le. Kia ni da ku. Just as he thought, an emotion flickered across his brother's eyes, but he pretended not to notice it. Kia ni da ka. Vili kia. Shrugging, he replied, Ya ka shi sa tao ni le ke. Kuma yo ni se. Yo yi hang. It took a moment for his brother to reply, but he finally said, Kia kuma sa. He smiled and got up to go. His brother walked him to the door, and as they bid each other goodbye, both brothers missed the deadly stare of the woman they thought who was sleeping. So, he wanted to use her as a pawn to get his way first, and then discard her. How brilliant his plan was, Ntxhi Laim thought as she watched him bid his brother goodbye. He was never an honest man to begin with, and she would have to be smarter in her ways. Here, there was no one to help her, and she was alone. If she wanted to be rescued, she needed to do it by herself. She shut her eyes before he turned around and pretended to stretch as if just waking. He came to sit down beside her on the bed and reached to touch her cheek. Shalala, Bumagahadu, he asked. Shaking her head, she replied, Chima, Dashikushepla. He smiled and helped her to sit up. Kumagalanga chaila tokana. No no kumohalunta kusita. Kanyati no kachisata. She nodded as he leaned over and kissed her before leaving. She watched as he disappeared out of the room, and the feeling of betrayal crept in. This was entrapment, and she had to figure out a way to get out of here before it was too late for her. The pain from her wound was still stinging, but it was much better than yesterday. She needed to dress and find Tongseng. Jisa returned with servants, and they placed food on the table for her. And then he dressed, came to give her a kiss before he left. She ignored his heat and left without eating. Jisa entered the royal court where his father was sitting at the throne enjoying a cup of ale, listening to the servants play the harp beside him. A huge, strapping older man with white hair, yet still possessing the body of a strong lad, his father was no one to mess with. When he noticed Jisa, he waved his hand and everyone packed up to leave. Bowing before his father, he replied, Zihotai, katutu takalushiha. Shalama, Marachi hala. He straightened and said, Haisang tun sa yochia, kutaka tu zisanu daka, Kulushia chumakarunu la wakutaja, Yande muja tu mochumatiyo. His father's eyes widened. Really kya? Kushai rong yali ne tu shipi wasinga sha, motu tsang na chi nuna gala hajalu noruku. Itsu gayin oli ku haisu sha. Jisa thought of the pains Ntxhi Laim had endured. Zihotai, muan dao ya za tu mua Kulushia leng zai shi dao. Ye yo la wa ku pa ku she yu chu kyan ya, she lo tia tsang ra ku lu pe seng. Kushai rong tali tu mua che na Lucia lo chi zao ku tu yo la galun tu na. Ku tu ta ran de gomba yu chu tsa sai lu da lu hu. Lu rong lu zu, ku te li sa kien ni lo to kulumbe. His father laughed and nodded, obviously touched by his words. Yin ya li ka hai. Da shi, ku lu ka mo sai, ku sa tia, ku yin tsa sai ka na. Nu no hai li ka hai ka, sai tao hai de ku yo ke la na lo. He lowered his head. Chỉ hóa tài ý chữ có những khó khăn hạt tiệt bé ôn hình nhau, tụm lại bé trường tỏ cho yếu kế. Cũng chẳng hạt tiệt có lần gì chỉ yếu sát chữ. Lúc xe lúc mua sai tiệt chỉ yếu kế, ta chỉ tụm nâng cái sai, bao có tụm ở chế lúc khó mua đi. Cũng chẳng tao hạt tiệt yếu cái bao khả trăng, tụi chỗ ở sơn đời có khó mua, yếu chỉ giàu có lúc xe kia. Rong, his father said. Rong. Cũng mà lý sao nữa cả, chỉ mua ra chỉ nhua. Ở chỗ chỉ hóa tài. A servant came running in and bowed before him. Della. Jisa moved to his father's side, and to his complete and utter surprise, the man whom Ntxhi Laim called Ntxhi Laim waltzed into the room. The man had the same shocked expression in his eyes when he discovered it was Jisa. He stopped in his tracks for a brief moment before he continued walking forward. Who was this man, and what was he doing here? "Jihotai zhongxie ge zai dao gu," he said. "Zhongxie, mo le ji ge hao dou zou gu wa gu zhe." He bowed and straightened. "Jihotai gu dou na, ye dou tao ge ba ne ge dou jihotai. Gu na ai dia ge dou du ji mu jiao dou yi ba dou zhou cha li heng dou zou. Gu sa bao, te gu sa ge na ba dou zhou na." His father laughed. "Lu ba lu jiao dou shai ge ya. Ge ya leng ti dia, gu lun bai yin te yin. Gu dou zhong du le dou. Gu ji ye ye lan cheng ma." "Oh, ge zi ye cheng ma dou dun da lo?" his father asked. "Ye ge ji ho dai." "Zhong, zhong xie ge dou zhe. Ge ba dao bao gu dou dun zhe ji sa." The man's eyes shifted his gaze toward him, and Jisa saw the anger glaring. He wondered what the man would say. "Nhớ rong dou ho dai Jisa." Jisa wanted to laugh. He walked down to the man and embraced him, whispering, "Ge ba sa bao, zhen zi lai ư." When he pulled back and smiled, he could see that the man was now almost unstable. He returned to stand before his father. "Jisa, ya dong tie yin mu nói blo mo. Ta lin da ja nu mu shai pe lu zha. Ya ai dia ni sa ge dia, gu zhao ge nu ge lang de gong." Jisa smiled. "Gu zhong xue zai dao." Tie Ying was not expecting this. The man who took over his ship was none other than the crown prince. As he followed him down the hallway, the many guards bowed before them, and Tie Ying's eyes scanned the room to find where she was. "Ge chi da yin tian qi lai. Nu mo qiao zhong bu lo," he said. "Ge leng zi ba bao de ge lu xue pei mo li no?" Smiling, Jisa replied, "Xue pei." "Gu chi dao xue pei ge de. Gu mo gui za he lu wo ge chi bao za. Cuo ya gu wa, gu zi yin zha jia wen de, gu te li o ya chi bong cha bong du." They rounded the corner and came to the dining hall, where servants were dressed in yellow serving food. To his surprise, Ntxhi Laim appeared beside a young man, smiling. He took a step forward when Jisa placed a hand on him to stop him. He warned. In a moment, Ntxhi Laim's eyes met his, and the color drained from her face. She started stepping toward them, but Jisa moved forward, took her arm, and pushed her to the young man she had entered with. A conversation was exchanged, and she disappeared as she turned back to look at him. Tie Ying watched as the crown prince returned to him. He said. Tie Ying wanted to beat the man into a bloody pulp and wipe the smile from his face. But to his horror, the crown prince replied, "Nu tong sing, cha guna," Ntxhi Laim cried as she tried to loosen his grip on her hand. "Cha guna ha!" Mu Ntxhi Laim, "Thao ge zao wo nyo de gu ma. Du hua dai ha li jia gu yi chu wo lin da. Ge chi mo li xia wo li gen cha le jia," she asked angrily. He let her go and bowed. "Gu yi hai de du zi zhou zi hua dai se. Lu ge gu wo li jia gu wo lin da, gu chi mo jia le de zha." She lifted his head up and tears filled her eyes. "Nu tong sing, thao ge mo beng si min ji ma. Ge yin bao hai de gu lo da ho lun ba lu zhe na li jia. Gu zhe guo yo si na, thao ge ba gu mu jiu ge dong Tie Ying." He shook his head. "Ji dao, gu tao zi." "Gu tao zi tia?" She picked up the vase and slammed it against his head as she ran the opposite way. Tie Ying was her ticket out of this place. She had to find him and leave with him. The king would understand if she told the truth about this to him. The hallway was a maze, and she was confused as she tried to find her way out. A light shined from an open door, and she raced toward it, seeing it leading to the outside. But the knock on her head sent her into a blinding haze, and as she turned around, she saw a blurred image of Gyochia walking toward her. When she came to, she was in the forest, in the dark, and there was nothing but silence. She was left to die in the outside. Pushing herself to a standing position, she controlled her breathing as she took a few steps to figure out where she needed to go. Then, she heard the howl of a wolf. and her body began to shake. She listened to the sudden silence, and when she heard the twig snap, she turned around to find two glittering eyes watching her from the dark. The smack of the tongue made her scream, and she ran for her life. The animal chased her out of the woods, and the rocks dug into her bare feet. She shouted for help as the wolf chased her onto the green grass where the manor was up ahead. She'd never been happier to see it before in her life. To her surprise, a lone rider came on a horse, and in her heart she knew exactly who it was. "Chisa!" she cried. She saw him raise his bow and fired. The arrow hissed past her and pierced the wolf behind her as he swung off his horse, picked her up from the ground and into his arms, just as the horse came to a halt in front of the dead wolf. She threw her arms around him and inhaled his scent, sobbing. He whispered. She pulled back. His eyes widened. Jenko, kuchishakala, ya, kuluchi yang mucho ka ton tia yang lama, de shi mui tu nang wo pei de ku. Kun cheng hai de ka yin bao tu nang na yan lung tu la. He brushed her hair away, kissed her, and then turned the horse back toward the manor. Si na mu, jiang kia ku la. Ya ka jiang kia ku tia ku yang mo kam ba so na ku sha, ka pa na? He asked. Ntxhi Laim nodded as she held on to him for support. Ku ta si, ku jalo, ku chi kia ka irong zi la. Ka ya ku tu, so ya na ka ku ilang te li mo jai la to sa. Kai ku de kang ka she ku. She nodded. Kun ka she? Ya lu rao ku chen kia ro tia, ku cha jai ka wo so ya na ku la tao. He stopped the horse and turned to eye her intensely. So ya. La lu so ya zong chai heng. Ka o pa to li ka hai ma. Ya ka wo chi tao, cha la hai cha ka tum plo na. She blushed and was thankful for the setting sun that hit her cheeks. Ku, ku cha lu. He smiled. Jong jong ku cha lu wa. They rode together to the entrance from the back of the manor. He jumped down and helped her off the horse. Mùng ba ka tu king. Mà nó mới được khôi chứ sưng tao tao có. Là ô những nhà đâu nữ sai hả tia, có lỡ gì một nhà thầu có nhớ gì cũng. Ô cháu nếu sẽ đợi trường ti là còn tuần trao đơn là ra đến lần tương bán đấy, tuần xa giờ tự sẽ ra đến đây đó. Và tới cái xe thì nếu sẽ đợi những gì sẽ kể nhà cá nhân sống, cái mà đi sinh gì đó.